I'm Marcus Richardson, 47 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life, a successful tech empire worth $80 million. A beautiful wife, Sarah, and what I believed was a loving family. Then my mother-in-law, Patricia, played the most devastating con game I've ever witnessed. She systematically convinced my wife that I was having multiple affairs, planting fake evidence, hiring actors to pose as mistresses, and even staging compromising photos. Sarah filed for divorce, demanding half my assets, while Patricia positioned herself as the grieving mother, comforting her betrayed daughter. But here's what they didn't know. I had security cameras everywhere, forensic accountants on retainer, and a private investigator who uncovered the entire scheme. The woman who called me son for 15 years was about to learn that stealing from a tech mogul requires more than manipulation and crocodile tears. Like and subscribe if you've ever faced family betrayal, because this story will show you exactly how I dismantled their operation piece by piece. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs earlier. My name is Marcus Richardson, and I built TechFlow solutions from the ground up over the past 20 years. What started as a small software development company in my garage had grown into an $80 million empire specializing in cybersecurity and data analytics. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, but I was prouder of my marriage to Sarah. Sarah and I met in college, both studying computer science, though she eventually shifted to graphic design. She was brilliant, creative, and had this infectious laugh that could light up any room. We married when I was 25 and she was 23, building our life together as my company grew. For 15 years, we were a team. She handled the creative aspects of my business presentations while I focused on the technical side. Our relationship had always been solid. We traveled together, shared the same values, and even after all these years, I still felt that flutter in my chest when she smiled at me. We never had children, not from lack of trying, but after several miscarriages, we decided to focus on each other and our careers. It was a choice that brought us closer together, or so I thought. 2 years ago, everything changed when Sarah's father died suddenly of a heart attack. Her mother, Patricia, was devastated. At 63, Patricia had never worked outside the home and found herself financially dependent on her late husband's modest pension. She was lonely, scared, and completely unprepared for life as a widow. Sarah, being the compassionate person she is, immediately invited her mother to move in with us. Our house was certainly large enough, a sprawling 8,000 square foot estate in the hills overlooking the city. Patricia could have her own wing, her own space, while still being close to family during her time of grief. I supported the decision completely. Patricia had always been kind to me, calling me son and treating me like the child she never had besides Sarah. She seemed genuinely grateful for our help, often cooking elaborate meals and keeping the house immaculate. For the first year, it worked beautifully. Patricia appeared to be healing. Sarah was happy to have her mother close, and I enjoyed the family dynamic. But sometime around the 18-month mark, things began to shift. Patricia started making small comments about my work schedule, how I was always traveling for business, how I spent too much time at the office. At first, I dismissed these as the concerns of a protective mother. After all, I did work long hours, and my business required frequent travel to meet with clients and oversee projects. Then came the night everything changed. I was returning from a 3-day business trip to Seattle, exhausted but excited to see Sarah. I walked into our bedroom to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, holding something in her hands. Her face was streaked with tears, and she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of hurt, anger, and betrayal. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." In her hands was a hotel receipt from my trip, but it wasn't from the business hotel where I'd stayed. This receipt was from a luxury resort, dated the same night I was supposed to be in meetings, and it showed charges for champagne, room service for 2, and a couple's spa treatment. "I can explain," I started, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized how impossible that would be. I had never been to that resort, never made those charges, never even heard of the place. Yet there it was, in black and white, with what appeared to be my signature on the bottom. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Patricia found this in your jacket pocket when she was taking your suits to the dry cleaner. She didn't want to tell me, but she said she couldn't stand to see me being deceived." That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. I stared at the hotel receipt in Sarah's trembling hands, my mind racing through every detail of that Seattle trip. I had stayed at the Marriott downtown, attended back-to-back client meetings, and spent my evenings reviewing contracts in my room, with room service consisting of a single turkey sandwich and black coffee. This luxury resort receipt was completely foreign to me. "Sarah, I've never been to this place," I said, reaching for the receipt. "This isn't even in Seattle. Look at the address. This is some resort in the San Juan Islands." I was in meetings until 8 p.m. both nights, and I have the conference center records to prove it. But Sarah pulled the receipt away from me, her face hardening. "Marcus, this has your signature, your credit card number. How do you explain that? I couldn't. The signature looked remarkably like mine, and somehow they had obtained my credit card information. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never been to that resort, never signed that receipt, never spent a romantic evening with another woman. Someone's setting me up, I said, hearing how desperate and cliché it sounded even as the words left my mouth. Sarah, you know me. In 15 years, have I ever given you reason to doubt my faithfulness? Her eyes softened slightly, but then Patricia's voice drifted from the hallway. Sarah, honey, I'm making tea. Would you like some? The timing was perfect to perfect. Patricia appeared in the doorway moments later, her face a mask of concern and motherly protection. Oh, Marcus, you're back. How was your trip? There was something in her tone, a subtle emphasis on the word trip that made my skin crawl. Sarah looked between us, and I could see the internal battle playing out across her face. 15 years of marriage and trust warring against this physical evidence and her mother's obvious suspicions. Patricia, I said carefully, Sarah mentioned, you found this receipt in my jacket pocket. I did, she replied, her voice heavy with regret. I wasn't snooping, Marcus. I was simply taking your suits to the dry cleaner like I always do, and it fell out. I almost threw it away, thinking it was just business expenses. But then I noticed, She paused dramatically, as if the words were painful. I noticed the romantic nature of the charges. Over the next 2 weeks, more evidence began to surface. A business card for a lingerie boutique allegedly found in my car, with a handwritten note on the back. Thanks for last night, darling, Jennifer. Photographs appeared on Sarah's phone, pictures that showed me at restaurants I'd never visited, with women I'd never met, looking intimate and relaxed. The photos were particularly disturbing because they were clearly professional quality. Someone had invested serious money in creating these images. The lighting was perfect, the angles carefully chosen to look candid, while actually being expertly staged. In one photo, I appeared to be holding hands with a stunning brunette across a candlelit dinner table. In another, I was supposedly embracing a redhead outside what looked like a hotel entrance. These came in the mail today, Sarah said one evening, her voice hollow as she spread the photos across our kitchen table. No return address, just these pictures and a note saying, I thought you should know what your husband is really doing. I picked up one of the photos, studying it carefully. The man in the image looked exactly like me, same hair, same facial features, same body type, but I knew it wasn't me. The wedding ring was wrong. Mine had a small scratch on the band from when I'd caught it on a filing cabinet years ago. The man in the photo wore an identical ring, but without the scratch. Sarah, this isn't me, I said, pointing to the ring. Look at my hands, see this scratch? The man in these photos doesn't have it. But Sarah was crying now, and Patricia had materialized beside her, wrapping her arms around her daughter's shoulders. Oh, sweetheart, Patricia murmured. I know this is painful, but at least now you know the truth. You deserve so much better than this. The worst part was watching Sarah's faith in me crumble, piece by piece. Every morning brought new evidence, new reasons to doubt. Phone calls at odd hours where the caller would hang up when Sarah answered. Credit card statements showing charges I never made. Even a supposed witness who claimed to have seen me at various locations with different women. Patricia played her role perfectly, the reluctant messenger, the protective mother who wished she didn't have to be the bearer of such devastating news. She would find the evidence, hesitate to show Sarah, then reluctantly reveal it because Sarah deserved to know the truth. But something didn't add up. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too perfectly damning, and Patricia's reactions, too rehearsed. Every piece of evidence that appeared seemed designed to cause maximum emotional damage while being just believable enough to avoid obvious suspicion. I started paying attention to Patricia's behavior, noticing things I'd missed before. How she always seemed to be nearby when Sarah confronted me with new evidence. How she had developed an uncanny ability to accidentally discover incriminating items. How her expressions of concern were always accompanied by subtle suggestions about protecting Sarah's financial interests. One evening, as I sat in my home office trying to figure out what was happening to my life, I heard Patricia on the phone. In the kitchen, her voice was different, harder, more calculating than the sweet, motherly tone she used around Sarah and me. No, not yet, she was saying quietly. She's not ready to file for divorce. We need more evidence, something that will make her angry enough to demand everything. Yes, I understand the timeline. Just be patient. I crept closer to the kitchen, my heart pounding. Patricia was facing away from me, her voice barely above a whisper. The photos were perfect, but we need something more immediate. Something that will push her over the edge. What about the hotel idea? Yes, that could work. Make sure the timing is right. I'll handle getting her there. I backed away slowly, my mind reeling. Patricia wasn't just finding evidence of my supposed affairs, she was orchestrating them. But why? What did she have to gain from destroying my marriage? Then it hit me. $80 million. That's what she had to gain. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Patricia wasn't just a grieving widow who had stumbled into our lives. was a predator who had been planning this destruction from the beginning. I needed to understand how deep this went and what had driven her to such elaborate deception. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying moments from the past 2 years, looking for clues I had missed. Patricia's initial gratitude when she moved in had seemed genuine, but now, I wondered if it had all been an act. I remembered how quickly she had become interested in our finances, asking innocent questions about my business, our investments, our estate planning. The next day, while Sarah was at work and Patricia was at her weekly bridge club, I did something I never thought I would do. I searched through her belongings. I felt sick about violating her privacy, but I needed answers. In her bedroom dresser, buried beneath layers of clothing, I found a small leather journal. My hands shook as I opened it. The first entry was dated 3 weeks after her husband's funeral, and it revealed a woman I had never known existed. Patricia's handwriting was neat and deliberate, and her words were chilling in their calculation. Harold left me with nothing but debt in this pathetic pension. The first entry read, 40 years of marriage, and I'm left to scrape by like some common widow, but Sarah married well better than she deserves. Marcus is worth millions, maybe tens of millions. Sarah doesn't even appreciate what she has. I flipped through more pages, watching Patricia's resentment grow and evolve into something far more sinister. She had researched my company extensively. Somehow, gaining access to financial records that should have been confidential, she knew about my offshore accounts, my investment portfolio, even my business insurance policies. Sarah is weak, one entry stated. She's always been emotional, always needed someone to lean on. If she believed Marcus was cheating, she'd be devastated, angry. She'd want to hurt him the way he hurt her. And in California, a wife can take half of everything, especially if there's infidelity involved. But the most disturbing entry was dated 6 months ago. I've found the perfect people to help me. Jennifer is an out-of-work actress who looks nothing like Sarah, perfect casting for a mistress. The photographer specializes in lifestyle shoots and doesn't ask questions as long as he's paid well. The hardest part will be finding someone who looks enough like Marcus to fool a camera. But I think I've found him, a struggling actor named David who could be Marcus's brother. Patricia had been methodical in her planning. She had studied my schedule, learned my travel patterns, and identified the best times to plant evidence. She had researched divorce law, consulted with private investigators about what kind of evidence would be most damaging, and even practiced her grieving mother act. The most chilling part was her timeline. She had given herself 2 years to complete her planning, of time to establish herself as the concerned mother, to study our marriage for weaknesses, and to slowly erode Sarah's trust in me. She had been patient, waiting for exactly the right moments to introduce each piece of evidence. Sarah's insecurities make this easier. Another entry read, she's always worried she wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, successful enough for Marcus. She married up, and deep down, she knows it. When she sees evidence that he's found someone better, it will confirm her worst fears about herself. Patricia had been playing us both like instruments in some twisted orchestra. She knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to present evidence to cause maximum damage. She had studied Sarah's emotional patterns and my defensive reactions, crafting her deceptions to exploit our natural responses. But what struck me most was the complete absence of any real affection in her writings. She wrote about Sarah with cold detachment, as if her own daughter were nothing more than a tool to be used. There was no love, no genuine concern, no motherly protection, only calculation and greed. The final entries revealed the endgame. Patricia planned to position herself as Sarah's sole emotional support during the divorce proceedings. She would encourage Sarah to demand the maximum possible settlement, suggesting that I had been hiding assets and that Sarah deserved compensation for years of humiliation. Once the divorce was finalized and Sarah had received her settlement, Patricia would gradually convince her daughter to make investments that would somehow find their way into Patricia's control. Sarah will be emotionally destroyed, Patricia had written. She needs someone to manage her finances, someone she trusts completely. She'll give me power of attorney, and then everything Marcus built will become mine through her. Justice. For all the years Harold and I struggled while people like Marcus lived in luxury, I photographed every page of the journal with my phone, my hands trembling with rage and disbelief. This woman had lived in our home for 2 years, eaten our food, accepted our generosity, all while planning to destroy everything we had built together. She had calculated not just the theft of my assets, but the complete destruction of my marriage and Sarah's emotional well-being. The depths of her betrayal were staggering. She wasn't just stealing money, she was stealing Sarah's ability to trust, to love, to believe in the fundamental goodness of the people closest to her. Patricia was destroying her own daughter's happiness for the sake of financial gain. But as I sat there in her bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her deception, I realized something important. Patricia had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She had assumed I would react like a typical guilty husband, defensive, desperate, eventually accepting defeat. She had never considered that an innocent man with the resources and intelligence to fight back might actually do so. Patricia had researched my business, my finances, my travel patterns. But she had overlooked my most important asset, my expertise in cybersecurity and data analytics. She had planned her fraud against someone who specialized in detecting and preventing exactly this type of deception. I carefully returned the journal to its hiding place and went to my office. It was time to start my own investigation, using tools and techniques that Patricia could never have anticipated. She had declared war on my family, but she had chosen the wrong enemy. That's I began planning my counterattack. I heard Patricia's car in the driveway. She was returning from Bridge Club, probably ready to plant the next piece of evidence in her carefully orchestrated campaign. But now I would be watching, documenting, gathering proof of her fraud. Patricia thought she was hunting a naive victim. She was about to discover she had cornered a very different kind of prey. Patricia's campaign against me wasn't limited to our home. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice that her reach extended into my professional life as well. The first sign came during a client meeting with Reynolds Industries, one of our biggest accounts. "Marcus," said Tom Reynolds, the CEO, his tone unusually cold. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention about your personal conduct." I felt my stomach drop. Tom and I had worked together for over 5 years. He had attended our anniversary parties, sent flowers when Sarah's father died, and had always treated me with respect and friendship. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Tom slid a manila envelope across the conference table. Inside were copies of the same fabricated photos that had appeared at my house, along with what appeared to be business emails suggesting I had been using company resources to facilitate my alleged affairs. "Someone anonymously sent these to our HR department," Tom explained. "They claim you've been using Reynolds Industries as a cover for your personal activities, billing us for trips that were actually romantic getaways." The forged emails were sophisticated. They showed conversations between me and someone named Jennifer about meeting at client locations, using business trips as opportunities for personal encounters. The formatting was perfect. The email addresses looked legitimate, and they even included details about actual client meetings I had attended. "Tom, these are completely fabricated," I said, studying the documents. "I can prove every one of these meetings was legitimate business. I have conference room logs, client signatures, hotel receipts from the actual hotels where I stayed." But Tom's expression remained skeptical. "Marcus, I want to believe you, but this is serious. If there's even a chance you've been billing us for personal expenses, we have to investigate. Our board is already asking questions." This was Patricia's next level of attack. She wasn't content to destroy my marriage, she wanted to obliterate my professional reputation as well. If major clients like Reynolds Industries started questioning my integrity, word would spread quickly through our industry. My business would collapse, making her anticipated divorce settlement even more lucrative, as Sarah would claim she needed compensation for lost future earnings. The pattern continued over the following days. 3 more clients received similar anonymous packages. My business partner, David Chen, pulled me aside after a particularly tense meeting with our second largest account. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" David asked. "I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you so much as look at another woman. But these photos, these emails, if they're real, they could destroy everything we've built." David was my oldest friend in the business, the person who had helped me secure our first major contracts. If he was beginning to doubt me, Patricia's plan was working perfectly. "David, I need you to trust me," I said. "Someone is orchestrating an elaborate fraud to destroy my reputation. I'm being set up, and I think I know who's behind it." "Set up by whom? And why?" I couldn't tell him about Patricia's journal, yet I needed more evidence. Something that would be credible to the outside world. "I'm working on proving it, but I need time. Can you help me hold things together while I figure this out?" David studied my face for a long moment. "The Marcus I know wouldn't do what these photos suggest. But you need to solve this fast. Our reputation is everything in this business." And rumors spread quickly. That evening, I received a call from Jake Morrison, a private investigator I had used occasionally for business security matters. Jake was a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud cases. "Marcus, I've been hearing some interesting rumors about you around town," Jake said without preamble. "Since I know you're not stupid enough to conduct affairs in such an obvious way, I'm guessing someone's running a game on you." "Jake, I need your help," I said. "Someone is systematically destroying my reputation and my marriage, and I think it's connected to a significant financial motive. Professional job, very professional. Fake photos, forged documents, coordinated attacks on multiple fronts. Whoever's doing this has invested serious money in planning." Jake was quiet for a moment. "This kind of operation requires resources and expertise. We're not talking about a jealous ex or a disgruntled employee. Someone wants to take you down completely, and they have the means to do it properly." Can you help me figure out who's behind it? I can try, but I'll need access to all the evidence they've presented. I'll also need permission to investigate your personal life, family, friends, anyone who might have motive and opportunity. I hesitated. Investigating Patricia would mean exposing her to potential criminal charges. Despite everything she had done, she was still Sarah's mother. But I was running out of options. Jake, I want you to investigate my mother-in-law Patricia Williams. She moved in with us 2 years ago after her husband died, and the timing of these attacks correlates with her presence in our home. Your mother-in-law, that's unusual. What's her financial situation? Desperate? Her husband left her with debt and a small pension. She's been living with us rent-free, and she has access to information about my business and personal life. Jake made notes as I spoke. Means, motive, and opportunity. I'll start with her financial records, see who she's been associating with, track her movements during the times this evidence was supposedly created. Jake, be discreet. If I'm wrong about this, I don't want to destroy my relationship with Sarah unnecessarily. And if I'm right, then my mother-in-law is a sociopath who's been planning to financially destroy her own daughter. For the past 2 years, after hanging up with Jake, I sat in my office staring at the latest batch of forged emails. The level of detail was impressive. Whoever had created these knew enough about my business to make them believable. They had accessed my actual email formatting, my signature style, even references to real projects and clients. But they had made mistakes. Small ones that someone without technical expertise might not notice. The metadata on the files was inconsistent. The timestamps showed the emails had been created recently, not on the dates they claimed to represent. Most telling of all, some of the technical details about projects were slightly wrong, the kind of errors someone would make if they were working from second-hand information rather than direct knowledge. Patricia had been thorough in her research, but she wasn't a technology expert. She had relied on hired help to create the forgeries, and hired help always left traces. I began building my own file of evidence, documenting every inconsistency, every impossibility, every piece of proof that these attacks were coordinated and deliberate. For every fake photo Patricia produced, I had real evidence of where I had actually been at that time. For every forged email, I had server logs and metadata that would prove the fraud. But I knew that technical evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Patricia had played the emotional game perfectly, exploiting Sarah's insecurities and positioning herself as the protective mother. To counter that, I needed to expose not just her methods, but her motives and her complete lack of genuine care for Sarah's well-being. The next morning, I received a call that changed everything. It was from Jennifer Walsh, one of the women allegedly shown in the compromising photos with me, Mr. Richardson. She said nervously, "I think we need to talk. Someone paid me to pose for photos with a man who looked like you, and now I'm seeing those photos being used in ways I never agreed to." Finally, a crack in Patricia's perfect plan. I met Jennifer Walsh at a quiet coffee shop downtown, away from anywhere Patricia might spot us. Jennifer was exactly as she appeared in the photos, attractive, professional-looking, but nervous and clearly uncomfortable with the situation she found herself in. "I'm an actress," she began, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. "I've been struggling to find steady work, and when someone approached me about a modeling job, I thought it was legitimate. They said they needed photos for a corporate campaign about successful couples." "Who approached you?" I asked, pulling out my phone to record our conversation with her permission. "A woman named Patricia. She said she was working for an advertising agency that represented successful businessmen. She showed me your photo and said they needed shots of you with different women for some kind of lifestyle marketing campaign." My blood ran cold. Patricia had used her real name with Jennifer, probably because she never expected the actress to come forward. "She paid me $5,000 for a full day of shooting," Jennifer continued. "We went to nice restaurants, hotels, even a spa. There was a man there who looked remarkably like you, same height, same build, same hair color. They called him David. We posed for hundreds of photos, all supposedly for this advertising campaign." Did Patricia explain why they needed these photos? Jennifer shook her head. She was vague about the details, just said they were creating marketing materials for upscale clients. The photographer was professional, the locations were legitimate, and they paid me in cash up front. It seemed like a real job. "When did you start to suspect something was wrong?" "When I saw the photos being used in a completely different context. A friend of mine works in PR, and she showed me some gossip about a tech executive whose wife was divorcing him over affairs. The photos they were using as evidence were the same ones I had posed for, but they were being presented as proof of real affairs, not modeling shots." I showed Jennifer the photos that had been used to torment Sarah. Her face went pale as she recognized herself in several of them. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This woman used me to destroy someone's marriage. I had no idea. I would never have agreed to this if I'd known what she was really planning. Jennifer, I need you to know that these photos have been devastating to my wife. She believes I've been having multiple affairs, and it's destroying our marriage. Tears filled Jennifer's eyes. I'm so sorry. I had no idea I was being used like this. What can I do to help? I'll testify. I'll sign statements. Whatever you need. Need you to tell this story to my private investigator. Every detail you can remember about Patricia, about the photographer, about the man who posed as me, everything. Jake Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, and Jennifer repeated her story in even greater detail. She provided contact information for the photographer, described the locations where the shoots had taken place, and gave us the timeline of when everything had occurred. The photographer's name is Rick Santos. Jennifer said he has a studio in the Arts District. He seemed legitimate professional equipment. Nice portfolio. But when Patricia paid him, she used cash, which I thought was odd for a corporate client. What about the man who posed as me? I asked David Chunno. That's not right, David, something else. He was an actor too, said he did a lot of corporate work and body double jobs. He knew he looked like you, even joked about it. Patricia had obviously chosen him carefully. Jake took detailed notes, already planning his next moves. I'll track down this photographer and the actor. If we can get them to admit they were hired to create fake evidence, we'll have solid proof of fraud. After Jennifer left, promising to cooperate fully with our investigation, Jake and I discussed the bigger picture. This is elaborate conspiracy, Jake said. Your mother-in-law has committed multiple felonies, fraud, extortion, potentially conspiracy to commit theft. She's invested thousands of dollars in this scheme, which suggests she believes the payoff will be substantial. She's after my entire fortune, I said. I found her journal. She's been planning this for 2 years, studying our marriage, our finances, our vulnerabilities. She wants Sarah to divorce me and claim half of everything, and then she plans to manipulate Sarah into giving her control over the settlement. Jake whistled low. That's not just fraud, that's financial elder abuse if she succeeds. Even though Sarah's not elderly, the manipulation tactics are the same. We need to move fast. Before she escalates, what's our next step? I'm going to track down every person Patricia has hired for this scheme. The photographer, the actor, maybe others we don't know about yet. I'll get statements from all of them, trace the money trail, document the entire conspiracy. Meanwhile, you need to start gathering evidence at home without tipping her off. How do I do that without Sarah knowing? Jake considered this carefully. You could install hidden cameras in common areas of your house, but you need to be careful about legal issues. Since it's your home, you have the right to monitor it, but recording private conversations can be tricky. Better to focus on documenting Patricia's behavior, her phone calls, her movements. I've already been doing some of that. I heard her on a phone call discussing the timeline for more evidence. She's not done yet. Good. Keep documenting everything. And Marcus, be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. If Patricia realizes you're onto her, she might accelerate her timeline or try something desperate. That evening, returned home to find Sarah and Patricia in the kitchen together, looking through what appeared to be legal documents. Sarah's eyes were red from crying, and Patricia had her arm around her daughter's shoulders in a gesture of comfort and support. Marcus, Sarah said, without looking up, we need to talk. I've been consulting with a divorce attorney. Patricia gave me a look of manufactured sympathy. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I tried to convince Sarah to give you another chance, but with everything that's come to light, she was pushing Sarah toward divorce now, accelerating the timeline just as Jake had predicted. Patricia had probably sensed that I was becoming suspicious. Or perhaps she simply felt she had accumulated enough evidence to guarantee a successful outcome. Sarah, I said carefully, before you make any permanent decisions, I want you to know that I've never been unfaithful to you. Not once, not ever. Someone is systematically creating false evidence to destroy our marriage, and I'm going to prove it. Sarah finally looked at me, her expression mixing hope with skepticism. How can you prove it, Marcus? There are photos, receipts, witnesses. How do you explain all of that? Because none of it is real. Someone has hired actors, photographers, and forgers to create elaborate fakes. They've invested thousands of dollars in this scheme, and they have a very specific financial motive. Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes, a moment of calculation, of concern. She was wondering how much I knew. That sounds like a desperate conspiracy theory, Patricia said gently, her voice full of motherly concern. Marcus, I understand you're hurting, but making wild accusations won't help anyone. It's not a wild accusation if I can prove it, I replied, watching her face carefully. And I can. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in Patricia's eyes. She was beginning to realize that her perfect victim might not be as helpless as she had assumed. The war was far from over, but the tide was starting to turn. The next few days brought a cascade of family drama that would have been comical if it weren't so devastating. Patricia had clearly decided to accelerate her timeline, and that meant bringing in reinforcements. Sarah's extended family. It started with a phone call from Sarah's sister, Michelle, who lived 3 states away. Michelle had never particularly liked me, always viewing me as the outsider who had stolen her sister away to a life of wealth and privilege that the rest of the family could only dream of. Marcus, Michelle said when she called, her voice dripping with false concern. I just wanted you to know that we're all supporting Sarah through this difficult time. Mom told us about the affairs, about how you've been treating Sarah. Mom, Patricia had managed to position herself as the family matriarch, the source of information and guidance for everyone. It was a brilliant move. She wasn't just manipulating Sarah anymore, she was controlling the entire family narrative. Michelle, none of those affairs happened, I said. Someone is creating false evidence to save it. Marcus, we've seen the photos. Sarah sent them to all of us. Frankly, I'm not surprised. Rich men like you always think you can have whatever you want. The call ended abruptly, and I realized that Patricia had been busy. She wasn't just destroying my relationship with Sarah. She was systematically turning every member of Sarah's family against me. Within hours, I received similar calls from Sarah's aunt, her cousin, and even her elderly grandmother. Each call followed the same pattern. They had all seen the evidence. They were all supporting Sarah. They all thought I was a cheating bastard who deserved whatever punishment was coming. Patricia had orchestrated a family intervention designed to isolate me completely while reinforcing Sarah's decision to divorce. The family dynamics became even more toxic when they started arriving in person. Michelle flew in first, followed by Sarah's Aunt Janet and her 2 adult children. Suddenly, our house was full of people who treated me like a pariah while showering. Sarah with support and Patricia with gratitude for protecting Sarah from my alleged deceptions. Thank God you were here, Mom, Michelle said at dinner one night, using Patricia's preferred title despite not being related to her by blood. If you hadn't found that evidence, Sarah might have lived in ignorance for years, while Marcus humiliated her. Patricia basked in the praise, playing her role perfectly. I just couldn't stand to see Sarah being deceived. It broke my heart to have to show her those photos, but she deserved to know the truth. I sat at my own dinner table, surrounded by my wife's family, feeling like a defendant in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. Every attempt I made to defend myself was met with eye rolls, dismissive comments, or outright hostility. Uncle Marcus, said Sarah's nephew Tommy, a college junior who had always looked up to me. My mom says you've been cheating on Aunt Sarah. Is that true? The question hung in the air like a bomb. Here was a kid I had helped put through school, whose college tuition I had quietly paid when his parents struggled financially, asking me if I was the monster his family now believed me to be. No, Tommy, I said quietly, it's not true. Someone is trying to make it look like I did those things, but I never have and never would betray your aunt. Tommy looked confused, glancing between me and his mother, Janet. But there are pictures. Pictures can be faked, I said. People can be paid to pose for photos. Technology makes it possible to create very convincing evidence of things that never happened. Janet laughed bitterly. Oh please, you're going to claim these are deepfakes or something. Marcus, just admit what you did and try to make this easier on Sarah. But something interesting happened during that dinner. I noticed that Patricia was watching me very carefully, studying my reactions to the family's attacks. She seemed to be evaluating whether I was broken enough yet, whether the pressure was sufficient to make me accept defeat. More importantly, I caught her in a small but significant lie. The poor dear has been so stressed, Patricia said, referring to Sarah. Just yesterday, she found another piece of evidence, a love letter that fell out of Marcus's briefcase. She was devastated all over again. But I had been with my briefcase all day yesterday. It had never left my sight, and Sarah had been at work until evening. There was no way she could have found anything in it during the time frame Patricia described. It was a small inconsistency, but it revealed that Patricia was getting careless, perhaps overconfident in her success. I also noticed that Patricia had a small recording device clipped inside her sweater pocket. It was almost invisible, but I caught sight of it when she reached across the table. She was recording our conversations, probably planning to use edited excerpts to further manipulate Sarah, or perhaps as evidence in the upcoming divorce proceedings. The irony was delicious. Patricia thought she was secretly recording me, but I was now aware of her surveillance. I could use this knowledge to feed her misleading information or catch her in contradictions. That night, after the extended family had finally gone to their hotels, I found Sarah sitting alone in our bedroom, staring at the divorce papers her lawyer had drawn up. Sarah, I said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Before you sign those, I want you to ask yourself one question. She looked up at me with eyes full of pain. What question? How did your mother become so good at finding evidence of my affairs? In 2 years of living with us, she's discovered more incriminating material than a team of private investigators might find. Doesn't that strike you as remarkable? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She said she was trying to protect me, that she felt suspicious about your behavior and started paying attention. Sarah, think about it logically. Your mother finds evidence in my jacket pocket, in my briefcase, in my car, places where any reasonable person would be careful not to leave incriminating material. And it's always perfectly timed, always discovered. Just when you're starting to feel better about our relationship. I could see doubt flickering in Sarah's eyes, but then Patricia's voice drifted from the hallway. Sarah, honey, are you okay? I thought I heard voices. The moment was broken. Patricia appeared in the doorway, her face full of motherly concern, and I saw Sarah's brief doubt disappear under the weight of her mother's presence. We're fine, Mom, Sarah said. Marcus we were just talking. Patricia's eyes met mine across the room, and I saw something cold and calculating in her expression. She knew I was starting to fight back, and she didn't like it. The family intervention was just the beginning. She was preparing for war, but she had made one crucial mistake. By bringing in the extended family, by escalating the drama so dramatically, she had created more witnesses to her behavior. And witnesses, I was beginning to realize, could be a double-edged sword. If I could prove that Patricia was orchestrating this entire deception, I wouldn't just be saving my marriage, I would be exposing her fraud to an audience of people who trusted her completely. The bigger her lie became, the more devastating its eventual collapse would be. Bet Patricia thought she was tightening the noose around my neck. In reality, she was building the scaffold for her own downfall. Patricia's escalation reached new heights. Over the following week, it was as if my subtle challenge the night before had triggered something desperate in her. A realization that she needed to close this case quickly before I could mount an effective defense. The new evidence appeared. With alarming frequency, a cocktail napkin with a phone number and a lipstick kiss, allegedly found in my car's glove compartment. A hotel keycard from a luxury resort that supposedly fell out of my gym bag. Most damaging of all, a voicemail on our home phone from a woman claiming to be pregnant with my child. Marcus, darling, the voice said, breathy and emotional. I can't keep this secret anymore. We need to talk about the baby. Call me back at the usual number, but be careful, I think your wife is getting suspicious. Sarah played the message. For me, with tears streaming down her face, pregnant, Marcus. You got another woman pregnant? I stared at the answering machine, my mind racing. The voice was unfamiliar, but professional. Another actress. Clearly, the timing was perfect. Designed to arrive just as Sarah's family was visiting, ensuring maximum emotional impact and plenty of witnesses to my supposed guilt. Sarah, I have never heard that voice before in my life, I said. This is another fake. Another piece of manufactured evidence. Think about it, if I was really having an affair with someone. Would I tell her to call our home phone? Would I be that careless? But Patricia was ready with an explanation. Cheating men get sloppy, she said sadly, putting her arm around Sarah. They start to believe they're invincible, that they'll never get caught. Marcus probably thought you'd never check the messages. The pregnant mistress story was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about a potential child, a permanent reminder of betrayal that would exist even after divorce. Sarah's inability to have children made this particular lie especially cruel, striking at her deepest vulnerability. But Patricia's acceleration was creating opportunities for me as well. The sheer volume of evidence was becoming suspicious, and some of the details were starting to contradict each other. The pregnant woman claimed to have been seeing me for 6 months, but other evidence suggested affairs with different women during the same time period. The timeline was becoming impossible to maintain. More importantly, Patricia was getting physically careless. I found professional photography equipment hidden in her closet, expensive lighting gear, backdrops, and camera equipment that was far beyond what a grieving widow should have been able to afford. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she had taken up photography as a hobby to deal with her grief. It helps me feel closer to Harold, she said with practiced sadness. He always wanted me to have a creative outlet, but the equipment wasn't dusty or well used. It was new, expensive, and configured exactly like the setup I had seen in the background of some of the fake photos. Patricia wasn't just hiring photographers, she had become one herself, probably to maintain better control over the evidence creation process. I also discovered that she had been intercepting our mail, a federal crime that she seemed unaware of. Several business letters that should have reached me had never arrived, and when I checked with the post office, they confirmed that someone had been collecting mail addressed to me using a forged power of attorney. The stolen mail gave Patricia access to my business correspondence, allowing her to create more convincing forgeries, but it also created a paper trail that would be easy for law enforcement to follow once I was ready to press charges. My private investigator, Jake Morrison, called with an update that changed everything. I found the actor who posed as you. Jake said his name is David Klein, and he's willing to talk. Turns out Patricia stiffed him on the final payment, and he's pretty angry about it. What's he willing to say? Everything. He'll testify that Patricia hired him specifically because he looked like you. She showed him photos, helped him practice your mannerisms, even coached him on how to sit and hold himself to match your body language. This wasn't just random casting. She studied you for months to find the perfect double. Can we get him on record? Already done? I have a signed statement and video testimony. He also kept text messages from Patricia discussing the shoots, including one where she explicitly mentions the goal of creating believable evidence for divorce proceedings. This was the breakthrough I needed, but I knew I had to be careful about how I used it. If I revealed the actor's confession too early, Patricia might find a way to discredit him or claim he was lying for money. I needed to wait for the perfect moment, when the revelation would have maximum impact. That moment came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Sarah's entire extended family gathered for what Patricia announced as an intervention. They had rented a private dining room at an expensive restaurant, and everyone was there: Michelle, Janet, the cousins, even Sarah's grandmother who had flown in from Florida. Marcus, Patricia said as we sat around the large table, Sarah's family loves her, and they love you too. That's why we're all here tonight. We want to give you a chance to come clean, to admit what you've done, and to work together on a solution that protects Sarah's interests. It was a beautifully orchestrated performance. Patricia positioned herself as the reasonable mediator, the family matriarch who just wanted what was best for everyone. Sarah sat beside her, looking exhausted and defeated, while her family members watched me with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright hostility. We've all seen the evidence, Michelle said. The photos, the receipts, the voicemails. Marcus, just admit what you did, and let's figure out how to move forward. You want me to admit to affairs I never had? I asked quietly. We want you to. Stop lying. Janet snapped. Stop putting Sarah through this agony of denial. That's when I realized Patricia had made her biggest mistake yet. By gathering the entire family together, she had created the perfect audience for the truth. When her deception was finally exposed, it wouldn't be a private conversation between Sarah and MIT, would be a public humiliation in front of everyone she had manipulated. I pulled out my phone and played the recorded statement from David Klein, the actor who had posed as me in the photographs. My name is David Klein. The recording began, and I was hired by Patricia Williams to pose as her son-in-law Marcus Richardson in compromising photographs. She paid me $3,000 to participate in staged scenarios designed to look like evidence of extramarital affairs. The silence around the table was deafening. Every face turned toward Patricia, who had gone completely pale. She provided me with detailed information about Marcus's appearance, mannerisms, and preferences. The recording continued. She directed multiple photo shoots at various locations, always emphasizing that the photos needed to look authentic, enough to convince Marcus's wife that he was having affairs. Sarah stared at her mother in shock. Mom, what is this? Patricia tried to recover, but she was clearly panicking. This is ... This has to be fake. Marcus is so desperate that he's hiring people to lie for him. But I had more evidence ready. I played Jennifer Walsh's testimony next, then showed them the metadata from the forged emails, proving they had been created recently rather than on their supposed dates. Everything you've seen, I said quietly, every piece of evidence that convinced you I was a cheating husband, was manufactured by Patricia Williams as part of an elaborate fraud to steal my assets through divorce proceedings. Sarah's grandmother, a sharp woman in her 80s, was the first to find her voice. Patricia, she said slowly, are you telling us that you created all of this? That you destroyed your own daughter's marriage for money? Patricia looked around the table at faces that had gone from supportive to horrified. Her perfect family intervention had become her public trial, and she was being found guilty by the very people she had manipulated. You don't understand, Patricia said desperately. Marcus has so much money, and Sarah deserves her share. I was just trying to protect her future. By lying to her, Michelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. By making her believe her husband was cheating. By putting her through months of agony. The web of lies was finally unraveling, but I knew Patricia wasn't finished yet. Cornered and exposed, she was about to become truly dangerous. The restaurant dinner ended in chaos. Sarah's family members left in stunned silence, some apologizing to me quietly, others simply too shocked to speak. Sarah herself sat motionless for long minutes, staring at her mother as if seeing her for the first time. How could you do this to me? Sarah finally whispered. How could you destroy my marriage, my happiness, my ability to trust anyone? All for money. Patricia tried one last desperate manipulation. Sarah, you don't understand how precarious your position is. Marcus could leave you at any time, and then what would you have? I was trying to secure your future. By convincing me my husband was a monster. Sarah's voice was rising now, drawing stares from other diners. By making me file for divorce. By putting me through months of hell. But I knew this confrontation was just the beginning. Patricia had committed serious crimes, and she wasn't going to simply apologize and disappear. If anything, being exposed had made her more dangerous. A person willing to orchestrate this level of deception wouldn't hesitate to escalate further when cornered. I was right. Over the next several days, Patricia launched what I can only describe as a scorched earth campaign. If she couldn't destroy my marriage through fake affairs, She would try to destroy me in every other way possible. Jake Morrison called me early Monday morning with disturbing news. Marcus, someone has been contacting your business partners and major clients, making accusations about financial impropriety. They're claiming you've been embezzling money, hiding assets, and using company funds for personal expenses. The same person who created the affair evidence has to be. The accusations are too coordinated, too specific to be coincidental. Someone with detailed knowledge of your business operations is trying to destroy your professional reputation. This was Patricia's backup plan. If she couldn't get half my assets through divorce, she would try to destroy my business entirely, making me financially vulnerable and potentially criminally liable. It was a desperate move, but potentially effective. Jake, I need you to expand your investigation. I want a complete forensic analysis of Patricia's activities over the past 2 years. Phone records, financial transactions, travel history, everything. If she's been orchestrating this level of fraud, there will be evidence. Already on it. I've also reached out to the FBI's white-collar crime division. The level of fraud we're looking at crosses state lines and involves significant dollar amounts. This is federal territory now. While Jake worked his investigation, I began my own technical analysis. As a cybersecurity expert, I had tools and techniques that law enforcement wouldn't think to use. I started with Patricia's digital footprint, looking for any electronic evidence of her conspiracy. What I found was staggering. Patricia had been far from careful with her electronic communications. Her email account contained correspondence with photographers, actors, private investigators, and even a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases. She had been planning this scheme in detail, with multiple contingency plans and backup strategies. The most damning evidence was a series of emails between Patricia and someone named Martin Reeves, who appeared to be her primary co-conspirator. Martin was a former private investigator who had been disbarred for unethical practices, and he seemed to be the architect of the entire operation. The photos are perfect. One email from Martin read, "David Klein is an excellent match for the target. We should be able to create enough evidence within 3 months to justify divorce proceedings." "What about the business angle?" Patricia had replied. "If the marriage evidence isn't sufficient, can we attack his professional reputation?" "Already working on that," Martin responded. "I have contacts who can plant rumors with his clients and partners. We can make it look like financial impropriety, tax evasion, maybe even connections to organized crime. The key is to create enough smoke that people assume there's fire." The email trail revealed the full scope of their operation. They had spent over $50,000 on actors, photographers, forged documents, and bribes to people willing to make false statements. They had researched my business operations, my client relationships, even my personal habits and preferences. Most chilling of all, they had discussed what to do if I became suspicious and tried to fight back. If Richardson starts investigating, Martin had written, "We need to accelerate the timeline. Plant evidence that suggests he's become abusive or threatening. Maybe have someone call in a domestic violence report. Once there's a restraining order in place, the wife will be completely under our control." Patricia had responded enthusiastically to this suggestion. Sarah would believe I was trying to protect her, and if Marcus is arrested for domestic violence, his credibility as a witness against us would be destroyed. Reading those emails, I realized how close I had come to being framed, not just for adultery, but for domestic violence as well. Patricia and Martin had been prepared to escalate to criminal accusations if their initial plan failed, but their electronic communications also provided me with everything I needed to destroy them legally. I copied all the evidence, verified its authenticity using forensic techniques, and prepared a comprehensive package for law enforcement. I also discovered something else. Patricia wasn't Martin's only victim. The emails referenced at least 3 other wealthy men who had been targeted with similar schemes over the past 5 years. This wasn't just about my money. This was a professional fraud operation that had been successful multiple times. "Jake," I said when I called him with my findings, "we're not dealing with a desperate widow who got in over her head. Patricia is part of a criminal enterprise that specializes in destroying marriages for financial gain. That explains the professional level of the operation," Jake replied. "No amateur could have pulled off something this sophisticated. I want to nail them all. Not just Patricia, but Martin Reeves and anyone else involved in this operation. If they've done this to other families, they need to be stopped. The FBI will be very interested in this. A multi-state fraud operation targeting wealthy individuals. That's exactly the kind of case they love to prosecute. But I knew that involving federal law enforcement would take time, and Patricia was still living in my house, still manipulating Sarah, still potentially dangerous. I needed to neutralize her immediately while building the case for prosecution. That's when I decided to implement my own surveillance operation. Using my company's most advanced security technology, I installed a comprehensive monitoring system. Throughout the house, hidden cameras, audio recording devices, network monitoring equipment that would track every electronic communication made from our home, It was all completely legal, my house, my network, my right to monitor it. And unlike Patricia's crude recording device, my system was invisible and undetectable. Within 48 hours, I had recorded Patricia making incriminating phone calls to Martin Reeves, discussing their next moves and even planning what she would do with her share of the money once the divorce was finalized. "Sarah's getting suspicious," Patricia said in one recorded conversation. "The restaurant thing was a disaster. Marcus is smarter than we thought. We need to accelerate." Martin replied, "Plant the domestic violence evidence now, before he can build a stronger case against us." "What about the other targets?" Patricia asked. "Are you still working the Seattle case? Henderson's wife filed for divorce last week. Should net us about $12 million when it's finalized. After expenses and my cut, you should see about $3 million from that one." They were casual about ruining lives, discussing their victims like stock portfolios. But they were also providing me with evidence of multiple federal crimes and giving me information about other victims who could become witnesses in the prosecution. I had everything I needed to destroy them. The question now was timing, when and how to spring the trap to cause maximum damage to their operation while protecting Sarah and the other innocent victims from further harm. Patricia thought she was hunting a naive businessman. She was about to discover she had targeted a predator far more dangerous than herself. Asterisk. The beauty of being a cybersecurity expert is that you understand not just how to protect systems, but how to penetrate them. While Patricia and Martin thought they were running a sophisticated operation, they were actually leaving digital fingerprints everywhere they went. My company had developed proprietary software for tracking financial fraud and cybercriminals. Now I turned those same tools against Patricia's conspiracy. Within a week, I had mapped their entire network of accomplices, traced their financial transactions, and identified at least 6 other victims across 4 different states. The technology revealed patterns that human investigators might have missed. Patricia and Martin had a specific methodology they followed with each target. First, they researched wealthy men with apparently stable marriages, focusing on those whose wives might be emotionally vulnerable. Then they orchestrated elaborate psychological campaigns designed to isolate the target and turn the spouse against them. But their biggest mistake was using the same photographers, actors, and forgers for multiple operations. David Klein, the actor who had posed as me, had also played the role of 3 other cheating husbands in different cities. Jennifer Walsh had been a mistress in 2 other cases. The photographer Rick Santos had created fake evidence for at least 5 different fraud schemes. Using facial recognition software and metadata analysis, I was able to connect all these cases definitively. The FBI was going to have a field day. With this evidence, more immediately, my surveillance system in the house was providing real-time intelligence about Patricia's next moves. She was becoming increasingly desperate as she realized that her original plan had failed completely. The phone conversations I recorded showed a woman who had lost control of her carefully orchestrated scheme. "Sarah barely speaks to me now," Patricia complained to Martin in one call. "She's starting to believe Marcus over me. We're running out of time." "Then we implement the final option," Martin replied coldly. "Plant the domestic violence evidence tonight. Once there's a police report and restraining order, it won't matter what Sarah believes. The divorce will proceed regardless." "What exactly do you want me to do?" "Injure yourself. Nothing permanent, just enough to photograph bruises and scratches. Then call 911 and report that Marcus attacked you. Sarah will witness your injuries and believe your story, especially if you're emotional enough. With a domestic violence charge, Marcus will be arrested and removed from the house. Game over." I listened to this conversation in my office, feeling sick at the lengths Patricia was willing to go. She was planning to falsely accuse me of domestic violence, a charge that could destroy my reputation permanently even if I was eventually acquitted. But she had made a critical error. By discussing this plan over the phone in my house, using my network, she had provided me with evidence of conspiracy to file a false police report, perjury, and obstruction of justice. More importantly, I now knew exactly what she was planning, and when. I immediately called Jake Morrison and my attorney, setting up an emergency meeting for that evening. We needed to move fast to prevent Patricia from implementing her false accusation plan. "Marcus," my attorney David Brennan said when we met, "if she files a false domestic violence report, the damage could be immediate and severe. Even if we prove it's fabricated, the accusation alone could affect your business relationships and community standing. Can we prevent her from making the report? Not directly, but if we have evidence that she's planning to file false charges, we can preemptively contact law enforcement and present our case." The recording of her conversation with Martin should be enough to establish that any subsequent domestic violence report is part of an ongoing fraud scheme. Jake had an additional suggestion. "We should coordinate with the FBI and local police to set up a sting operation. Let Patricia implement her plan, but have law enforcement ready to arrest her when she files the false report. That way we catch her in the act of committing the crime. It was risky, but it would provide the strongest possible evidence of her criminal intent. We spent the next several hours coordinating with law enforcement, setting up recording equipment that would capture Patricia's attempts to frame me. The trap was set for the following evening. Based on the recorded conversations, Patricia planned to stage her fake assault when Sarah was out of the house at her book club meeting. She would injure herself, call 911, and claim I had attacked her in a fit of rage about the divorce proceedings. What she didn't know was that FBI agents would be monitoring the house, recording her every move, ready to intervene the moment she filed false charges. But Patricia surprised us all by changing her plan at the last minute. Instead of waiting for Sarah to leave for book club, she decided to stage the incident with Sarah present, probably calculating that having a witness would make her story more credible. This created a dangerous situation if Patricia injured herself in front of Sarah. My wife might genuinely believe her mother had been attacked. I was in my office when I heard Patricia call out from the kitchen. Marcus, come here. I need to talk to you." Sarah was in the living room, well within earshot. This was it. Patricia was implementing her plan, and I had to be ready to protect both myself and Sarah from the psychological trauma of witnessing staged violence. I activated my phone's recording app and walked to the kitchen, where Patricia was standing near the counter with her back to me. As I entered the room, she suddenly spun around, her face already showing what appeared to be fresh bruises and scratches. "Don't come any closer," she screamed, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I won't let you hurt me again." It was a masterful performance. The injuries looked convincing, her terror seemed genuine, and her timing was perfect. Sarah came running from the living room, saw her mother's battered appearance, and immediately assumed I had attacked her. "Marcus, what did you do?" Sarah gasped, moving to protect her mother. But Patricia had made one final, fatal error. In her desperation to create convincing injuries, she had used a technique that I recognized from my forensic training. The pattern of bruises and scratches was consistent with self-inflicted wounds. And more importantly, she had inadvertently photographed herself creating the injuries earlier. My security cameras had captured Patricia in the bathroom 30 minutes earlier, using makeup and theatrical techniques to create fake bruises, then supplementing them with real scratches made with a kitchen knife. The timestamp on the footage would prove that her injuries were self-inflicted and premeditated. "Sarah," I said calmly, "your mother is lying. She injured herself to frame me for domestic violence. I have video footage of her creating those wounds. In our bathroom, 30 minutes ago." Patricia's face went white. She had been so focused on the psychological manipulation that she had forgotten about the possibility of surveillance. "That's impossible," she stammered. "He's lying to protect himself." But Sarah had known me for 15 years, and she could hear the certainty in my voice. "Marcus, are you saying you have proof that my mother hurt herself?" Before I could answer, FBI agent Rebecca Torres, who had been monitoring from outside, entered through the back door with her credentials clearly visible. "Patricia Williams," she said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." As Agent Torres read Patricia her rights, I played the recorded conversation where Patricia and Martin had planned this exact scenario. Sarah listened in stunned silence as her mother's voice clearly outlined the plan to falsely accuse me of domestic violence. The woman who had lived in our home for 2 years, who had accepted our generosity and called me son, who had destroyed our marriage for financial gain, was finally exposed completely. Her web of lies had collapsed under the weight of technology, surveillance, and her own greed. But as the FBI led Patricia away in handcuffs, I realized that the hardest part was just beginning. Sarah had to process the fact that her own mother had been willing to destroy her happiness, her marriage, and her ability to trust anyone, all for money. The technical victory was complete, but the emotional healing would take much longer. The night of Patricia's arrest was one of the longest of my life. After the FBI took her away, Sarah and I sat in our living room in complete silence for what felt like hours. The house felt different, somehow lighter, but also emptier, as if a oppressive presence had been lifted but had left a vacuum in its wake. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" "About a month," I said. "Honestly, I started getting suspicious when the evidence against me became too convenient, too perfectly timed. Then I found her journal. She kept a journal about this." Sarah's voice was hollow with disbelief. I showed her the photographs I had taken of Patricia's handwritten plans, watching Sarah's face crumble as she read her mother's cold calculations about their relationship, about me, about the systematic destruction of our marriage for financial gain. "She wrote about me like I was a chess piece," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Like my feelings, my pain, my love for you, meant nothing to her. How could she do this to her own daughter?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Agent Torres. "Marcus, we need you and Sarah to come to the field office tomorrow morning. Patricia Williams is already talking." and what she's telling us is bigger than we initially thought. The next morning, we learned the full scope of Patricia and Martin's operation. In an interview room at the FBI field office, Agent Torres laid out evidence that painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating. For nearly a decade, Patricia Williams has confessed to participating in 17 different fraud schemes targeting wealthy men across 6 states, Agent Torres explained. The total amount stolen exceeds $40 million. Your case was just their latest operation. Sarah stared at the files spread across the table: photographs, financial records, victim statements from other families who had been destroyed by Patricia's schemes. 17 families. 17 that we know of. There may be more. Ms. Williams and Martin Reeves had perfected a system of psychological manipulation and evidence fabrication that was extremely effective. Until you fought back, Marcus, they had never been caught. But Agent Torres had more revelations. The most damaging evidence came from Patricia's final phone call last night, made from her cell in county lockup. She didn't realize we were monitoring her communications. She played a recording that made my blood run cold. Patricia's voice was clear and unrepentant as she spoke to someone we couldn't identify. The Richardson job is blown, Patricia said matter-of-factly. Marcus turned out to be smarter than we anticipated. You need to warn the others. If he's been investigating us, he might have found evidence of the other operations. What about the Henderson case in Seattle? The other voice asked. Complete that one quickly and shut it down. And tell Martin to clean out his files. If the FBI is involved now, they'll be looking at everything. Patricia, you promised this would be the last one. You said after the Richardson score, you'd retire. Patricia laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. There's too much money in this business to retire. Rich men who think they're untouchable make the best targets. After I get out of this legal trouble, we'll find new territory and start again. The casual way she discussed destroying lives was chilling, but what struck me most was the complete absence of any regret about what she had done to Sarah. Her own daughter's emotional devastation was simply collateral damage in her pursuit of wealth. She's not getting out of legal trouble, Agent Torres said grimly, based on the evidence you've provided and her own confessions. Patricia Williams is looking at federal charges that could result in 25 years in prison. After we left the FBI office, Sarah and I drove home in silence. The woman she had called mother for 35 years had been revealed as a monster, someone who viewed her own daughter as nothing more than a tool to access wealth. That evening, Sarah's extended family began calling. Word of Patricia's arrest had spread quickly, and everyone wanted answers. The same relatives who had attacked me at the restaurant intervention were now apologizing, expressing shock and disbelief at Patricia's deception. I feel so stupid, Michelle said when she called. She was so convincing, so protective of Sarah. I never imagined she could be capable of something like this. None of us did, I replied. She was a professional manipulator. This wasn't her first time, but the family's shock and apologies, while necessary, couldn't undo the damage that had been done. Relationships had been strained, trust had been broken, and Sarah was struggling with the fundamental question of how to process being betrayed by her own mother. The media attention began. Within days, tech executive exposes mother-in-law's multi-million-dollar fraud scheme was the headline in the local newspaper. Business journals picked up the story, focusing on how cybersecurity expertise had been used to uncover criminal activity. Sarah hated the publicity, but I knew it was important for other potential victims to understand how these schemes operated. More importantly, the media coverage led to additional victims coming forward. Within a week of Patricia's arrest, the FBI had received calls from 12 other families who suspected they had been targeted by similar operations. The investigation was expanding rapidly. But the most significant development came when Martin Reeves was arrested trying to flee the country. In his possession, authorities found detailed files on over 30 potential targets, financial records showing payments to dozens of accomplices, and most importantly, recordings of conversations with Patricia that revealed the full scope of their partnership. Patricia was never the mastermind, Agent Torres explained when she called with the update. Martin Reeves has been running this operation for years, recruiting women like Patricia who had access to wealthy families and the acting ability to play the concerned mother or sister or friend. How many women like Patricia were working for him? At least 8 that we've identified so far. Reeves would target specific wealthy individuals, then recruit women in their social circles who could gain access and manipulate family relationships. It was incredibly sophisticated. The revelation that Patricia was part of a larger criminal network was somehow both relieving and disturbing. Relieving because it explained the professional level of her deception. She had been trained and coached by experts. Disturbing because it meant there were other families somewhere dealing with the same devastation we had experienced. Sarah took the news hard, so even her decision to target us wasn't personal, she said bitterly. We were just a job to her, selected by some criminal mastermind who thought Marcus would be an easy mark. Sarah, I said gently, the important thing is that it's over. Patricia is in jail. Martin is in jail, and their operation has been exposed. We can start rebuilding now. But Sarah shook her head. How do I rebuild trust? Marcus, how do I ever believe anyone again when my own mother was willing to destroy my happiness for money? How do I know that other people in my life aren't just playing roles, manipulating me for some hidden agenda? It was a question I couldn't answer, but I knew it was the real work we faced. The legal case against Patricia was solid. The financial crimes would be prosecuted, and justice would be served. But the psychological damage she had inflicted on her own daughter would take years to heal. The smoking gun had been Patricia's own words, recorded and preserved for posterity. But the real bullet she had fired was aimed at Sarah's ability to trust, to love, to believe in the fundamental goodness of the people closest to her. Healing that wound would be the hardest victory of all. In the weeks following Patricia's arrest, I watched Sarah go through stages of grief that were heartbreaking to witness. She wasn't just mourning the loss of her mother, she was mourning the realization that the mother she thought she knew had never existed at all. I keep thinking about moments from my childhood, Sarah said one evening as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset, times when I thought she was being protective or caring, and now I wonder if she was manipulating me even then. It was a cruel realization. Patricia's betrayal wasn't just about the recent fraud scheme. It called into question Sarah's entire relationship with her mother. Every memory, every moment of apparent love and support. The hardest part for Sarah was going through Patricia's belongings, which the FBI had returned after processing them for evidence. Box after box of items that seemed to tell the story of a normal, grieving widow, but now took on sinister implications. We found photo albums filled with pictures of our family gatherings. But now we noticed how Patricia always positioned herself prominently in family photos, as if establishing her place in our lives for some future purpose. We found thank you notes she had written for gifts we had given her, but the handwriting was the same as the forged evidence she had planted. Most disturbing of all, we found copies of our financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies that Patricia had somehow obtained and studied meticulously. She had known our net worth down to the dollar, had researched our assets and vulnerabilities with the thoroughness of a professional auditor. She knew more about our finances than I did, Sarah said, holding up a detailed analysis of our investments that Patricia had apparently prepared. She had charts showing the potential division of assets in different divorce scenarios. This wasn't impulse or desperation, this was a business plan. Among Patricia's possessions, we also found items that revealed her emotional manipulation techniques, self-help books about psychology and persuasion, guides to reading body language and detecting emotional vulnerabilities, even a manual about crisis acting that had clearly been used to practice her various roles in the deception. But the most significant discovery was a leather portfolio hidden in the false bottom of Patricia's jewelry box. Inside were original documents that proved her entire backstory was fabricated. Harold Williams, the man Patricia claimed was her late husband, had actually died 20 years earlier, not 2 years ago. The Patricia Williams who had lived with us was actually Patricia Montgomery, Harold's second wife, who had divorced him and taken his name. She had been using a false identity to gain access to our family. My real mother died when I was 12, Sarah said, staring at the documents with tears in her eyes. This woman stole my mother's identity, learned everything about my family, and used that information to infiltrate our lives. The revelation explained so much. Patricia's occasional confusion about family events that had happened before she supposedly knew us. Her perfect knowledge of family dynamics and relationships that should have taken time to learn. Her immediate comfort in our home and with our routines. She had studied us like test subjects, learning our patterns and vulnerabilities with the patience of a creditor. The grieving widow persona had been completely fabricated, designed to elicit sympathy and ensure we would invite her into our home. Agent Torres confirmed our worst fears when she called with additional information from the FBI's investigation. Patricia Montgomery has been using false identities for over 15 years, she explained. She's not Sarah's mother's friend from childhood. She's a professional grifter who specializes in identity theft and long-term infiltration of wealthy families. How did she know so much about Sarah's real mother? I asked. She probably researched public records, obituaries, school yearbooks, anything that would help her build a convincing persona. She may have even contacted people who knew Sarah's real mother and pumped them for information under false pretenses. The depths of the deception were staggering. Not only had Patricia orchestrated an elaborate fraud to steal our money, but she had also stolen Sarah's grief, exploiting her daughter's loss and longing for maternal connection. Sarah never had closure with her real mother's death, Agent Torres observed. Patricia exploited that emotional vulnerability, offering the maternal relationship Sarah had been missing while simultaneously planning to destroy her happiness. This revelation changed everything for Sarah. The anger she felt about the financial fraud was nothing compared to the rage she experienced when she realized that even her grief had been manipulated. She stole my memories of my real mother. Sarah said, for 2 years, I called this woman Mom, included her in family traditions, shared intimate moments that should have been reserved for someone who actually loved me. She took my mother's place and used it to hurt me. But there was also relief in the revelation. Sarah had been struggling with guilt about feeling betrayed by her own mother, wondering what she had done wrong to deserve such treatment from someone who was supposed to love her unconditionally. She was never my mother, Sarah said, and for the first time since Patricia's arrest, there was strength in her voice. My real mother loved me. This woman was a stranger who studied me like a target and used my love against me. The healing process began with that realization. Sarah started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, someone who could help her process the complex emotions of being deceived so thoroughly by someone she had trusted completely. It's important for you to understand that none of this was your fault, Dr. Jennifer Martinez explained during one of our joint sessions. Professional con artists are experts at emotional manipulation. They study human psychology and exploit natural human tendencies like trust, love, and the desire for family connection. But how could I not see it? Sarah asked. Looking back, there were signs, inconsistencies. How could I be so blind? Because you're a normal person with normal emotional responses, Dr. Martinez replied. You wanted to believe that someone who claimed to love you actually did love you. That's not naivety, that's humanity. Slowly, Sarah began to reclaim her sense of self. She stopped second-guessing every relationship and interaction, stopped wondering if other people in her life might be secretly manipulating her for hidden agendas. The key breakthrough came when she found our original wedding album, with photos and memories that predated Patricia's infiltration of our lives. Looking at pictures of our early marriage, Sarah could see the genuine happiness and love that had existed before Patricia's poisonous influence. We were really happy, weren't we? She said, studying a photo from our 5th anniversary. Before she came into our lives, we trusted each other completely. We can have that again, I said. We can rebuild that trust and happiness. Patricia's deception doesn't change what we had before she arrived, and it doesn't have to define what we have. Going forward, Sarah nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw hope in her eyes. The woman who had stolen her mother's identity and infiltrated our family was out of our lives forever. The real work of healing could finally begin. 2 months after Patricia's arrest, Agent Torres called with news that would give us the closure we desperately needed. Patricia had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, and part of that cooperation included a supervised meeting where Sarah could confront her about the deception. It's completely voluntary. Agent Torres explained Sarah doesn't have to do this if she's not ready. But sometimes victims find that facing their abuser directly helps with the healing process. Sarah was quiet for a long time after the agent's call. The idea of seeing Patricia again clearly terrified her, but I could also see a spark of determination in her eyes. I want to do it, she finally said. I need to look her in the eye and ask her why. I need to hear her explain how she could do this to someone she claimed to love. The meeting was arranged for the following week at the federal courthouse, in a secure conference room with FBI agents present. Sarah's therapist would also attend to provide support if needed. We spent the intervening days preparing Sarah for what might be an emotionally devastating encounter. Don't expect genuine remorse, Dr. Martinez warned. People who commit this level of manipulation rarely experience true empathy for their victims. Patricia may try to justify her actions or even blame you for being too trusting. You need to be prepared for that. When the day arrived, I could see Sarah's hands trembling as we walked into the courthouse. Patricia was already seated at the conference table, wearing an orange jumpsuit and looking smaller somehow than she had in our home. The confident, manipulative woman who had orchestrated our destruction looked diminished and defeated. But when Patricia saw Sarah, her expression immediately shifted into the familiar mask of motherly concern. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, tears instantly appearing in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you have to see me like this. This has all been such a terrible misunderstanding." Even now, even after being caught and confessed, Patricia was still trying to manipulate the situation. But Sarah had prepared for this. "Stop," Sarah said firmly. "Don't call me sweetheart. Don't pretend you care about me. I know who you really are now." Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Then she tried a different approach. "Sarah, you have to understand. I was trying to protect you. Marcus has so much money, and you're so trusting. I was worried about your future if something happened to your marriage. By destroying my marriage yourself." Sarah's voice was growing stronger. "By convincing me my husband was cheating. By hiring actors to pose as his mistresses, I was trying to open your eyes to what kind of man he really is," Patricia insisted. "Rich men like Marcus always have affairs eventually. I was just showing you the truth early so you could protect yourself." was fascinating to watch Patricia work. Even caught and facing prison time, she was still trying to manipulate Sarah's emotions, still attempting to justify her actions as protective rather than predatory. But Sarah had been preparing for this for weeks, and she was ready. "You're not my mother," she said quietly. "My mother died when I was 12. You stole her identity, studied my family, and used my grief to infiltrate my life. You never loved me, you never even knew me. I was just a job to you." For the first time, Patricia's composure cracked completely. Faced with the evidence of her true identity and the complete collapse of her deception, she couldn't maintain the motherly persona any longer. "Fine," she said, her voice turning harsh. "You want the truth? Here's the truth. You were an easy mark. A wealthy husband, a trusting wife with abandonment issues from losing her mother, young. You practically begged to be manipulated." Agent Torres started to intervene, but Sarah held up her hand. She wanted to hear this. "Martin and I researched dozens of potential targets before settling on your family," Patricia continued. "Any pretense of affection completely gone. You had money. Marcus was often away on business, and you were emotionally vulnerable. It was textbook." "What about all the time we spent together?" Sarah asked. "The conversations, the family dinners, the holidays. Was any of that real to you?" Patricia shrugged. "It was work. Sometimes unpleasant work, listening to you talk about your feelings and your marriage problems. But I knew that every day I spent playing the loving mother brought me closer to a multi-million-dollar payoff." The casual cruelty of her words was breathtaking. This woman had lived in our home for 2 years, had comforted Sarah through difficult times, had been present for birthdays and anniversaries and quiet family moments, and it had all been an elaborate performance. "Did you ever feel guilty?" Sarah asked, "even for a moment, when you saw how much your lies were hurting me?" "Guilty?" Patricia laughed, a harsh sound devoid of any warmth. "Sarah, you lived in a mansion while I scraped by on a widow's pension. You had everything handed to you because you married well, and you didn't even appreciate it. Why should I feel guilty about taking some of what you didn't deserve?" This was the real Patricia Montgomery Bitter, entitled, "Completely Lacking in Empathy or Genuine Human Connection." The loving mother-in-law had been nothing more than a character she played, like an actress in a long-running show. But instead of devastation, I saw relief on Sarah's face. This cruel, calculating woman bore no resemblance to the mother figure Sarah had loved and trusted. The confrontation was finally separating the deception from reality. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. Patricia looked confused. "Thank you for what?" "For showing me who you really are. For months, I've been torturing myself about why my mother would betray me. But you're not my mother, you're just a criminal who used my love against me. And now I can stop grieving for someone who never existed." Sarah stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I hope the money was worth it," she said, "because you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And you'll have nothing to show for it except the knowledge that you destroyed dozens of families for your own greed." As we left the courthouse, Sarah seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The confrontation had been painful, but it had also been liberating. "She really never cared about me at all, did she?" Sarah said as we drove home. "No," I replied, "but that's not a reflection on you. That's a reflection on her complete inability to form genuine human connections. The fact that you were capable of loving someone so completely, even someone who didn't deserve it, shows the strength of your heart." The woman who had called herself Patricia Williams was finally gone from our lives forever. The real work of rebuilding could now begin. The full scope of Patricia's criminal enterprise became public during the federal trial that began 6 months after her arrest. What we had experienced as a personal betrayal was revealed to be part of a sophisticated operation that had destroyed dozens of families across multiple states. Martin Reeves, facing life in prison, had decided to cooperate fully with prosecutors, providing detailed testimony about their methods and revealing the identities of other co-conspirators. The courtroom became a showcase for the most elaborate marriage fraud scheme in recent legal history. The defendants operated what can only be described as a criminal corporation. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh explained to the jury. They researched wealthy targets, developed detailed infiltration plans, and executed psychological warfare campaigns designed to destroy marriages and steal assets. Sarah and I attended every day of the trial, watching as witness after witness described similar experiences to ours. There was Robert Henderson from Seattle, whose wife had been convinced he was embezzling from his own company. There was David Chen from Portland, ironically sharing the same name as my business partner, whose marriage had been destroyed by allegations of hidden gambling addictions and secret families. Each story followed the same pattern. A vulnerable family member with access to the target, months of careful psychological manipulation, professionally created false evidence, and a systematic campaign to isolate the target while turning their spouse against them. Patricia Montgomery was particularly skilled at the maternal figure role. Martin Reeves testified. She could research a target family, assume the identity of a deceased relative or family friend, and gain complete access to their lives within months. Her performance was so convincing that victims often continued to trust her even when presented with evidence of her deception. The prosecution presented our case as the centerpiece of their argument, using my security footage and recorded conversations to show the jury exactly how the scheme operated. Watching Patricia's recorded phone calls played in open court was surreal. Hearing her casual discussion of destroying lives for money, in her own voice, with no possibility of denial or justification. But the most damaging evidence came from Patricia's own journal, which prosecutors read aloud in its entirety. The clinical way she described studying our marriage, exploiting Sarah's vulnerabilities, and planning the systematic destruction of our relationship for financial gain, left the courtroom in stunned silence. She writes about Sarah as if she's describing a laboratory animal, the prosecutor noted. Subject responds well to emotional manipulation when isolated from support systems. This is not the writing of a concerned mother, this is the documentation of a predator. When Patricia took the stand in her own defense, she tried to resurrect her persona as the protective mother figure, claiming she had genuinely been concerned about Sarah's welfare and had only become involved with Martin's scheme to gather evidence of my supposed infidelity. I really did love Sarah like a daughter, she testified, tears streaming down her face. Everything I did was to protect her from a man I believed was betraying her. But the prosecution was ready for this performance. They played her recorded conversation with Martin, where she explicitly discussed using Sarah's emotions against her, treating her like a chess piece to access our assets. Ms. Montgomery, the prosecutor said, if you loved Sarah like a daughter, why did you tell Mr. Reeves that the subject's emotional vulnerability makes her perfect for manipulation? Patricia's composure cracked. That was taken out of context. I was just trying to understand how to help her. Help her by hiring actors to pose as her husband's mistresses. Help her by forging evidence of affairs that never happened. Help her by planning to falsely accuse her husband of domestic violence. One by one, the prosecution dismantled every element of Patricia's defense, using her own words and actions to prove that her claims of protective motivation were just another layer of deception. The trial also revealed the broader impact of their operation. Families had been destroyed, businesses had failed, children had lost their homes, and several victims had suffered complete financial ruin. The Henderson family in Seattle had been forced to declare bankruptcy after legal fees and asset division consumed their wealth. 2 other victims had attempted suicide after losing everything they had built over decades of hard work. This was not a victimless crime, the prosecutor argued in closing statements. The defendants systematically destroyed the most fundamental relationships in their victims' lives: marriages, families, the basic human capacity for trust. They turned love into a weapon and used it to steal, not just money, but the emotional security of everyone they touched. Sarah testified on the final day, describing the psychological impact of discovering that someone she had loved and trusted was actually a professional manipulator who viewed her as nothing more than a tool for accessing wealth. She didn't just steal money, Sarah told the jury, her voice strong and clear. She stole my ability to trust, to believe that people who claim to love me actually do love me. She took my grief for my real mother and used it as a weapon against me. That kind of damage doesn't heal quickly, and some of it may never heal completely. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Patricia Montgomery was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Martin Reeves received life in prison. Their network of accomplices, photographers, actors, document forgers, and other co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. Judge Harrison's final comments captured the magnitude of what we had endured. The defendants in this case represent a particularly insidious form of criminal enterprise. They weaponized human emotion and exploited the most sacred bonds of family and marriage for financial gain. Their actions caused immeasurable harm, not just to their direct victims, but to the institution of trust itself. As we left the courthouse, after sentencing, Sarah and I were approached by several other victims who wanted to thank us for fighting back and exposing the operation. If you hadn't been smart enough to detect the fraud and brave enough to fight it, Robert Henderson said, Patricia and Martin would still be out there destroying families. You saved people you'll never meet from going through what we all experienced. The trial had been emotionally exhausting, but it had also been cathartic. Watching Patricia's careful manipulations exposed in clinical detail, seeing her sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison, knowing that her operation had been completely dismantled, provided a sense of justice that went beyond personal vindication. But more importantly, the trial had given Sarah the final proof she needed that none of Patricia's deception had been her fault. She wasn't naive or foolish for trusting someone who claimed to love her. She was the victim of professional criminals who had spent years perfecting their techniques for exploiting human kindness and emotional vulnerability. It's over, Sarah said as we drove home from the courthouse for the final time. Patricia Montgomery is gone forever, and everyone knows the truth about what she did to us. The explosion of truth had been devastating for Patricia and her criminal network, but for us, it marked the beginning of genuine healing. The lies were gone, the manipulator was in prison, and we were free to rebuild our marriage on the foundation of honesty and trust that had existed before Patricia's infiltration. Hardest battle was finally won. The legal ramifications of Patricia's criminal enterprise extended far beyond her prison sentence. In the months following the trial, Sarah and I found ourselves involved in a complex web of civil lawsuits, insurance claims, and financial recovery, efforts that would take years to fully resolve. Our attorney, David Brennan, filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Patricia, Martin, and their entire network of accomplices, seeking damages for emotional distress, business losses, and the costs of the private investigation that had exposed their fraud. The criminal trial established their guilt, David explained, but the civil case is where we recover the actual damages you suffered. We're seeking compensation for the harm to your marriage, your business reputation, the investigation costs, legal fees, and the ongoing therapy expenses. The financial impact of Patricia's scheme had been substantial. My business had lost 3 major clients who had been influenced by the planted rumors about my character. The private investigation had cost over $100,000. Sarah's therapy and our marriage counseling represented ongoing expenses that could continue for years. More significantly, we had uncovered evidence that Patricia had been stealing from us throughout her 2-year residence in our home. Financial forensics revealed that she had been skimming money from household accounts, using our credit cards for unauthorized purchases, and even selling valuable items from our house and replacing them with cheaper replicas. She was essentially robbing you blind while planning the larger fraud, David noted, reviewing the financial analysis. Over 2 years, she stole approximately $200,000 in cash and valuables, separate from the attempted marriage fraud. The civil lawsuit also targeted the broader network of people who had enabled Patricia's operation. Rick Santos, the photographer, who had created the fake evidence, was personally liable for damages. The actors who had posed in compromising photos faced individual lawsuits. Even the hotels and restaurants that had provided locations for the staged scenes could be held partially responsible if they had known about the fraudulent nature of the photo shoots. But pursuing civil damages against criminals is notoriously difficult. Patricia had spent most of her ill-gotten gains and had no significant assets to seize. Martin Reeves had hidden money in offshore accounts that would take years to locate and recover. Many of their accomplices were judgment-proof, having no assets worth pursuing. We may never recover the full amount of damages, David warned us, but the lawsuit serves other purposes beyond financial recovery. It establishes a legal record of the harm they caused. It may uncover additional hidden assets, and it sends a message to other potential fraud conspirators that this kind of crime carries serious consequences. The insurance complications were equally complex. Our homeowner's insurance policy included coverage for identity theft and fraud, but the insurance company initially resisted our claim, arguing that we had voluntarily allowed Patricia to live in our home. They're claiming you assumed the risk by inviting a stranger into your house, our insurance attorney explained. They don't want to acknowledge that Patricia's deception was sophisticated enough to fool anyone. It took 18 months of legal battles, but eventually the insurance company agreed to a settlement that covered most of our investigation costs and provided some compensation for the stolen property. The settlement also included funding for ongoing security measures to protect against future infiltration attempts. The business impact required separate legal action. Several clients who had terminated their contracts based on Patricia's planted rumors were legally obligated to honor those agreements once the fraud was exposed. We sued for breach of contract and won significant judgments against companies that had acted precipitously based on unverified allegations. Your reputation in the business community has been fully restored, David reported, after the commercial litigation concluded. In fact, you may be stronger than before, because now everyone knows you successfully fought off a sophisticated fraud attempt. The most satisfying legal victory came when we sued Martin Reeves' operation under federal racketeering statutes. The RICO case allowed us to claim treble damages and attorney's fees, and it enabled prosecutors to seize assets that Martin had hidden in shell companies and foreign accounts. RICO was designed exactly for this kind of criminal enterprise, the federal prosecutor explained. When you have an organized group using fraud and deception to steal from multiple victims across state lines, it's a textbook racketeering case. The racketeering conviction allowed authorities to freeze Martin's assets worldwide and begin the process of recovering stolen funds for distribution to victims. While the recovery process would take years, early estimates suggested that victims might eventually recover 60 to 70% of their losses. But the most important legal consequence was the precedent our case established for future prosecutions. Law enforcement agencies across the country began using our investigation techniques and evidence-gathering methods to detect similar fraud schemes. Your case has become a template for investigating marriage fraud operations, Agent Torres told us. The combination of digital forensics, financial analysis, and psychological profiling that you used is now being taught to FBI agents nationwide. The legal system also responded with policy changes designed to prevent similar crimes. New regulations required enhanced verification for divorce proceedings involving high-value assets. Courts began requiring independent investigation of domestic violence allegations in divorce cases where significant financial stakes were involved. Professional licensing boards took action against the licensed professionals who had participated in Patricia's scheme. Rick Santos lost his business license and faced professional sanctions that would prevent him from working as a photographer. Several private investigators who had provided services to Martin's operation had their licenses revoked. The legal consequences extended to the technology sector as well. My company developed new software specifically designed to detect the kind of digital fraud that Patricia had employed, and we began offering services to help other potential victims identify manipulation campaigns before they could cause serious damage. What you've created is essentially an early warning system for marriage fraud, David observed. Your software can detect patterns of evidence manipulation that would be invisible to most victims until it's too late. The civil lawsuits were finally resolved 3 years after Patricia's arrest, with settlements totaling $4.2 million from various defendants. While we would never recover every dollar that had been stolen or every cost we had incurred, the legal victory was complete and comprehensive. More importantly, the legal consequences had effectively dismantled the entire criminal network. Patricia Montgomery would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Martin Reeves was serving a life sentence without parole. Their accomplices faced years in prison and professional ruin that would prevent them from ever operating similar schemes. Justice has been served, Sarah said as we left the courthouse after the final settlement hearing. Not just for us, but for all the families they destroyed. The legal system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but ultimately effectively. The criminals were in prison, the victims had been compensated to the extent possible, and new safeguards were in place to protect future potential targets. But beyond the financial recovery and criminal convictions, the legal consequences had provided something even more valuable: complete vindication and public acknowledgement that we had been the victims of an elaborate criminal conspiracy, not the naive marks that Patricia had assumed we would be. The legal chapter of our ordeal was finally closed, but the healing process was just beginning. The hardest part of our recovery wasn't the legal battles or the financial investigations, it was learning how to trust each other again. Patricia's deception had poisoned the well of our relationship so thoroughly that even after her conviction, Sarah and I struggled to reclaim the easy intimacy we had once shared. I keep waiting for you to reveal that you're not who I think you are, Sarah admitted during one of our couples therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez. Patricia fooled me so completely that I don't trust my own judgment about people anymore. It was heartbreaking to hear, but I understood. If someone could live in our home for 2 years, call Sarah daughter, comfort her through difficult times, and all the while be planning to destroy her happiness for money, how could Sarah ever feel secure in any relationship again? The rebuilding process started with small steps. Dr. Martinez suggested we essentially record each other, creating new memories and experiences that weren't tainted by Patricia's presence. We began dating again in her at restaurants we had never visited with Patricia, weekend trips to places she had never been, activities that were purely ours. You need to reclaim your relationship, Dr. Martinez explained. Right now, too many of your shared experiences are overshadowed by Patricia's manipulation. You need to create new foundations based on who you really are, not who you were when you were being deceived. It was strange and wonderful to fall in love with my wife again. I rediscovered things about Sarah that I had forgotten during the chaos of Patricia's campaign: her infectious laugh when she was genuinely relaxed, her brilliant insights about people and situations, her incredible resilience in the face of betrayal that would have broken many people. Sarah began to trust her own instincts again. Slowly but steadily, she started making decisions about people and situations without second-guessing herself or looking for hidden motivations. She reconnected with friends she had distanced herself from during Patricia's residency, rebuilding relationships that the fraud had damaged. I realize now that Patricia isolated me from my support system, Sarah reflected 6 months into our healing process. She became my primary confidant and advisor, which meant I stopped relying on other people who might have noticed inconsistencies in her story. We established new traditions and routines that were completely our own. Weekly date nights that Patricia had never been part of, a monthly weekend getaway tradition that was uniquely ours. Even simple things like grocery shopping together became important rituals of RECONNECTION. The breakthrough moment came during a trip to Italy that we took for our 17th wedding anniversary. We were sitting in a small cafe in Tuscany, watching the sunset and talking about our plans for the future, when Sarah suddenly started laughing. "What's funny?" I asked. "I just realized I haven't thought about Patricia once today," she said. "For the first time in 3 years. I spent an entire day just being happy with you without wondering if it was real or if someone was manipulating me." That trip marked a turning point. We came home feeling like ourselves again, not victims, recovering from trauma, but partners who had survived something terrible together and emerged stronger. The experience had tested our marriage in ways we never could have imagined, but it had also proven that our love was resilient enough to survive even professional-level psychological warfare. We made practical changes to new security systems, both digital and physical, to protect against future infiltration attempts. Background checks for anyone who would have significant access to our home or personal information. A healthy paranoia about people who seemed interested in our financial situation or tried to quickly to establish intimate relationships. But we also made emotional changes that were more important than any security measures. We developed new communication patterns that prioritized complete honesty, even about uncomfortable topics. We created safe words and signals that either of us could use if we were feeling manipulated or uncertain about someone's motivations. Trust isn't about being naive, Dr. Martinez observed during one of our final therapy sessions. It's about making informed decisions to be vulnerable with people who have earned that trust. Patricia exploited your natural human tendency to trust family members, but that doesn't mean you should stop trusting everyone. Sarah's extended family played an important role in our healing process. Her sister Michelle, Aunt Janet, and other relatives who had initially believed Patricia's lies made genuine efforts to understand how they had been manipulated and to rebuild their relationships with us. "We were all victims of her deception," Michelle said during a family gathering. A year after Patricia's conviction, "She used our love for Sarah against us, and we're sorry we didn't see through it sooner." The family's acknowledgement of their role in perpetuating Patricia's fraud was crucial for Sarah's healing. She needed to know that the people who had turned against me during Patricia's campaign weren't fundamentally disloyal, but rather victims of the same sophisticated manipulation that had fooled her. We also found purpose in helping other families who had been targeted by similar schemes. Through victim advocacy groups and law enforcement training programs, we shared our story and the techniques we had used to expose Patricia's fraud. Helping others navigate similar betrayals gave meaning to our suffering and helped us process our own trauma. Every family we help protect from this kind of fraud makes what we went through worthwhile, Sarah said after we finished a presentation to FBI agents about recognizing marriage fraud operations. By the end of our second year of recovery, we had achieved something that seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of Patricia's arrest. We were genuinely happy again. Not just recovered or functional, but actually happier than we had been before Patricia entered our lives. "We know things about each other now that we never would have learned under normal circumstances," Sarah observed. "I know you'll fight for our marriage, even when everything seems hopeless. You know I'm strong enough to survive complete betrayal and still choose to love again." The rebuilding of trust hadn't just restored our relationship, it had made it stronger than it had ever been. We had been tested by fire and emerged with a deeper understanding of each other and an unshakable confidence in our bond. Patricia had intended to destroy our marriage for her own financial gain. Instead, she had inadvertently given us the greatest gift possible: absolute certainty that our love could survive anything. 3 years after Patricia's initial arrest, I received a call that brought our story full circle. Agent Torres was calling to inform us that Patricia Montgomery had died in federal prison, apparently from complications related to diabetes that she had hidden from medical staff. She was found in her cell during morning count, Agent Torres explained. The medical examiner determined it was natural causes, but there are indications she may have deliberately avoided taking her insulin. The news brought a complex mix of emotions: relief that the woman who had terrorized our family was gone forever, sadness that someone's life had ended in such a bitter, isolated way, and a strange sense of closure that the final chapter of Patricia's story had been written. "I don't feel good about anyone dying," Sarah said when I told her the news. "But I also can't pretend to mourn someone who viewed my happiness as an obstacle to her financial goals." Patricia's death triggered a final round of legal proceedings as authorities distributed her remaining assets to victims. It turned out she had hidden a small amount of money in an account under another false identity, which was divided among the families she had destroyed. Our share was less than $10,000 a pittance compared to what she had tried to steal from us, but symbolically important as the final recovery of stolen funds. More significantly, Patricia's death prompted Martin Reeves to make a full confession from his prison cell, apparently hoping for some form of compassionate release in his old age. His detailed statement provided law enforcement with information about fraud operations they hadn't even known existed, leading to additional arrests and the recovery of millions more in stolen assets. Reeves gave us names, locations, methods, even victim lists. Agent Torres told us Patricia's death seems to have freed him to talk about things he was previously protecting. We're discovering that their operation was even larger than we initially thought. The final scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Over 20 years, Patricia, Martin, and their network had targeted more than 60 wealthy families, stealing an estimated $150 million through various fraud schemes. Our case had been neither their first nor their most lucrative, but it had been the one that finally brought them down. If you hadn't fought back the way you did, Agent Torres reflected, they would probably still be operating today. Your technical expertise and refusal to accept the obvious explanation saved dozens of families from experiencing what you went through. The law enforcement community had embraced our case as a template for investigating similar crimes. The techniques I had developed for tracking digital fraud were being taught at FBI training academies. The psychological profiling methods we had used to understand Patricia's manipulation tactics were being incorporated into victim services programs. But the most satisfying justice came not from Patricia's death or Martin's life sentence, but from the positive changes our case had inspired. New laws made it harder for criminals to assume false identities and infiltrate families. Enhanced background check requirements for domestic workers and caregivers were protecting vulnerable elderly people from similar schemes. Several states had passed Patricia's laws legislation specifically designed to address the kind of long-term psychological manipulation and marriage fraud that we had experienced. These laws created enhanced penalties for criminals who exploited family relationships for financial gain and provided better legal protections for victims. Your case has literally changed how the criminal justice system approaches this type of crime. Our attorney David Brennan observed, the legal precedents you established are being cited in fraud cases across the country. The business community had also learned from our experience. Corporate security firms were now offering services specifically designed to protect wealthy individuals from infiltration attempts. Background investigation companies had developed new techniques for verifying the identities of people seeking access to high-net-worth families. My own company had become a leader in developing technology to detect and prevent marriage fraud. The software we created could analyze patterns of evidence in communication to identify potential manipulation campaigns before they could cause serious damage. Law enforcement agencies and private security firms were licensing our technology to protect their clients. You've turned your victimization into a tool for protecting others, Sarah observed. Patricia tried to destroy us for money, but instead, she inspired us to build something that prevents other families from going through what we experienced. The most meaningful recognition came from other victims of similar schemes. We received letters and emails from families across the country who had used our story and techniques to identify fraud attempts against their own marriages. Some had caught the deception early and avoided serious damage. Others had used our legal strategies to fight back against schemes that were already in progress. Your courage to go public with your story saved our marriage, wrote one couple from Texas. When my mother-in-law started showing us evidence of my husband's affairs, I remembered reading about your case and insisted on forensic analysis of the photos. They were fakes, just like yours. The ripple effects of our fight against Patricia continued to expand years after her death. Law schools were teaching our case as an example of how sophisticated fraud operations work and how victims can protect themselves. Therapy programs for fraud victims were using our recovery process as a model for helping others rebuild trust and intimacy after betrayal. But perhaps the most important justice was the simple fact that Sarah and I had not only survived Patricia's attack on our marriage, but had emerged stronger and happier than before. The woman who had tried to destroy our love for her own profit had inadvertently given us an unshakable foundation of trust and mutual respect. She gambled everything on the assumption that our marriage was weak enough to destroy, Sarah reflected, as we visited Patricia's grave not to mourn, but to mark the final closing of that chapter of our lives. She lost that bet completely. Justice had been served in every possible way. The criminals were in prison or dead. The victims had been compensated. The legal system had been strengthened. Future families would be better protected. And most importantly, love had triumphed over greed. Trust had proven stronger than manipulation, and truth had ultimately prevailed over even the most sophisticated deception. Patricia Montgomery had intended to steal our fortune and destroy our happiness. Instead, she had given us the greatest gift imaginable, absolute proof that our love was unbreakable. 5 years after Patricia's arrest, Sarah and I stood in the same church where we had been married 20 years earlier, preparing to renew our vows. The ceremony wasn't about replacing our original wedding, it was about celebrating the marriage we had rebuilt from the ashes of Patricia's deception. Today, we're not just renewing vows. I said in my speech to our gathered friends and family. We're celebrating the fact that our loves survived professional-level psychological warfare and emerged stronger than ever. The guest list included many people who had been part of our journey back from betrayal. Agent Torres was there, along with Dr. Martinez and several other victims of similar fraud schemes who had become close friends. David Brennan sat in the front row with his family, having guided us through years of complex litigation. Even Jake Morrison, the private investigator whose work had been crucial to exposing Patricia's fraud, was present to witness our celebration. But the most important guests were Sarah's family members Michelle, Janet, her cousins, and grandmother, who had learned to forgive themselves for being manipulated by Patricia's deception. Their presence symbolized the healing of relationships that had been damaged by the fraud scheme. We were all victims, Michelle said during her toast at the reception. But Marcus and Sarah showed us that being a victim doesn't mean being defeated. They fought back, they exposed the truth, and they saved other families from experiencing what we went through. Our renewed vows reflected everything we had learned about trust, communication, and resilience during our recovery process. We promised, not just to love each other, but to protect each other from those who would exploit our love for selfish gain. We committed to maintaining the open communication and healthy skepticism that had become our defense against future manipulation. I promise to trust you completely, Sarah said, her voice strong and clear, while never again being naive about people who would use that trust against us. The ceremony was covered by several media outlets, not because of any celebrity status, but because our story had become a symbol of how ordinary people could fight back against sophisticated fraud operations. The coverage helped spread awareness about marriage fraud schemes and provided hope to other victims that recovery was possible. Our business had thrived in the years since Patricia's conviction. The anti-fraud software we developed had become an industry standard, and my company was now worth over $200 million. The attempt to destroy my reputation had instead enhanced it, as clients valued working with someone who had proven capable of detecting and defeating complex deception campaigns. Ironically, Patricia made you more successful than you would have been otherwise, Sarah observed. By attacking us, she forced you to develop expertise and technology that became incredibly valuable. We had also established the Sarah Richardson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of marriage fraud and family infiltration schemes. The foundation provided legal assistance, therapy services, and technical expertise to families targeted by similar operations. Every family we help makes our own suffering meaningful, Sarah explained to a journalist covering our vow renewal. Patricia intended to destroy us, but instead she inspired us to protect others. The foundation had already assisted over 100 families in identifying and fighting fraud attempts. Our early warning system had prevented millions of dollars in losses and saved dozens of marriages from being destroyed by false evidence campaigns. We had also become advocates for legislative changes to protect vulnerable families. Patricia's laws had been passed in 12 states, creating enhanced penalties for marriage fraud and providing better legal protections for victims. We testified before congressional committees about the need for federal legislation to address cross-state fraud operations, but the most important change was in our relationship itself. The experience had stripped away any illusions about the potential for evil in the world, but it had also revealed the incredible resilience of genuine love. We had learned to trust each other completely while maintaining healthy boundaries with new people in our lives. We're not paranoid, Sarah explained to couples who sought our advice about protecting their marriages. We're just informed. We know what sophisticated manipulation looks like, and we're prepared to recognize and resist it. Our home had been completely renovated, both to erase any traces of Patricia's presence and to incorporate advanced security measures that would prevent future infiltration attempts. But more importantly, it had become a sanctuary of trust and intimacy that reflected our renewed commitment to each other. As we danced at our vow renewal reception, Sarah looked up at me with eyes that held no doubt, no uncertainty, no fear of hidden deceptions. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if Patricia had never targeted us? I considered the question carefully. We would have been happy, I said finally, but we wouldn't have been as strong. We wouldn't have known with absolute certainty that our love could survive anything. We wouldn't have developed the tools to help other families facing similar attacks. So you're saying Patricia accidentally gave us a gift, the biggest gift imaginable. She tried to prove that our marriage was a lie, and instead she proved that it was unbreakable. 6 months after our vow renewal, we received news that brought our story completely full circle. A couple in Denver had used our fraud detection software to identify a marriage infiltration scheme targeting their family. The criminals were arrested before they could cause any damage, and the intended victims never experienced the trauma that we had endured. That's what victory looks like, Sarah said when we received the thank you letter from the Denver family. Not just surviving the attack, but preventing others from being attacked in the first place. As I write this final chapter, 7 years have passed since Patricia Montgomery first entered our lives. She is dead, her criminal network has been dismantled, and the legal system has been strengthened to prevent similar crimes. More importantly, Sarah and I are genuinely happier than we have ever been. Patricia's scheme failed completely. She tried to steal $40 million from us and ended up with nothing except a prison sentence and an early death. She tried to destroy our marriage and instead made it unbreakable. She tried to isolate us from our support systems and instead connected us with a network of advocates, law enforcement professionals, and other families who shared our commitment to fighting fraud. The woman who called me son for 2 years while planning to destroy my life taught me the most important lesson of all, that genuine love, when tested by fire, becomes stronger than any deception. She gambled everything on the assumption that greed could triumph over trust, that manipulation could defeat honesty, that professional criminals could destroy ordinary people who dared to fight back. She was wrong about everything. If you're facing family betrayal, if someone you trusted has used your love against you, if you're wondering whether it's possible to rebuild trust after devastating deception, let our story be proof that it is not only possible, but that you can emerge stronger than you ever imagined. The truth always wins in the end. Love always triumphs over greed. And sometimes, the people who try to destroy your happiness end up giving you the greatest gift of all, absolute certainty that what you have is real, unbreakable, and worth fighting for. Patricia Montgomery tried to steal our fortune and failed. But she succeeded in giving us something far more valuable, the knowledge that our love could survive anything the world might throw at us. And that, in the end, made us the richest people in the world.